Joined now by NHL insider Frank Seravalli of Daily Faceoff and the Frankly Speaking podcast. How we doing, Frank?
I'm good, guys. How are you?
Oh, of course you're good. He was at the Phillies clinching game last night. Congratulations to you and your ball club.
Yeah, it's a wild time to be a Philly sports fan. Eagles undefeated, Phillies off to their second straight NLCS. It's been absolutely electric here. And I'm really excited because the NLCS doesn't open until Monday and Tuesday next week. I bet you that with the Canucks in town, there will be some Canucks, including Rick Tocchet, at that baseball game.
You're dunking with the Eagles and the Phillies. How the Flyers looking this year, Frank?
Undefeated as well. Want to know after a big victory against
Columbus. I think they're going to exceed some expectations, and I know that sounds funny to say for a team that traded some players away. Mm-hmm. They're getting Sean Couturier and Cam Atkinson back. Like they're not going to be that much worse. So. And John Tortorella squeezes every drop out of his teams. Like I've been saying forever, not because he's a bad guy or anything like that. He's the worst coach for a team that's trying to rebuild because he's actually probably pretty good at his job. Although people in the lower mainland might not agree.
Wow. I mean, there was that one incident here.
There was that 1 year.
But he also admitted, Frank, in terms of his resume year in Vancouver, he says, I'll admit, my heart and head was not in the Vancouver job. He was still reeling from losing the Blue Shirts job, and so
it was in Point Roberts.
Yes, yeah,
right,
exactly.
Literally.
And honestly, Frank, like we still to this day get that question. What was your year with Tortorella like?
It was great.
Blake and I did not have a single problem with him all year. He was fantastic. He was there at the appointed time. He answered the questions, and of course he saved a lot of local dogs.
Much better times these days, Frank, after an 8-1 win. This market is just the feet up, pina colada in hand here.
I told you guys, I think the Canucks are going to be good. And look, one game and one very lopsided game at that. But I can't help but like the energy, the way that they had attention to detail compete. They were ready to play. And they squared off against an Oiler team that hasn't really had much to think about, coasted through the preseason. The expectations are there. And to open, you have a fight in the first few minutes, and then you hit the Oilers in the face with a 2x4. That's how you start the year.
It's a good launching pad. It's a really good launching pad.
Did you hear McDavid's comments? He was a little sour about the power play going out late with a 6-1 lead. What are you expecting tomorrow night in Edmonton?
It's funny that you said that because we were just talking off camera about Bryce Harper seizing on the Arcia comments. When you are at McDavid's level and the Harper level and Michael Jordan and whoever else is there, it's a small pantheon. You need something to get you excited for game 2 of 82. Yes. And getting drubbed on the road to start your year is one thing, but being upset about we're not playing pogs here. Like this is for keeps and it's the NHL. Like, what do you expect? And it's also a team in Vancouver with really wonky special teams the last few years. The power play's been okay, but why not? I love it from Rick Tocchet. Like, hey, we're sending you a message. We're here and we ain't going anywhere. We're not just going to take our foot off the gas because you want us to.
Just to be clear, Pogs are the little plastic coins. Is that what Pogs were? Remind me.
Yeah, it's like 1993. I'll just transport you back there. Used to carry a plastic tube of them on the school bus and you'd play with your buddies. And you always had like one that was like a metal one and it was called the hammer. And if you slammed it down, you play for keeps. you got to take the other kid's Pog and take them home with you. It was awesome.
Vaguely remember this.
So I think we played marbles like that.
Yes, exactly.
Marbles and slinkies. Jesus.
Yeah, we're old.
Karis, you just dated yourself.
Oh, I know. Dig out a little hole in the mud and then roll marbles towards it. Anyways, Conor Garland, what are you hearing?
Nothing new. I think this is one of those stories that's probably going to settle down for a bit. Look, the best way to move on for both sides is to play really well. And I like the statement on opening night. Really nice little nifty play. I've been really consistent in my comments around Conor Garland since he arrived in Vancouver. He has openly kind of said, especially after that first season, that he hasn't really felt comfortable. I think there's a good player in there. I think there's a guy that works his ass off and competes. And I think he plays a lot bigger than he is. But at a certain point, if you aren't comfortable and you know that the team is trying to trade you and move on from you, as they have been for really since Jim Rutherford and Patrick Allvin took over, kind of makes it hard for you to want to be there, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
So like, I think this is a two-way street, a two-part problem. No one is absolved of anything in this little mess. And it's a contract that right now is just incredibly difficult to move. We've seen a reduction in value of wingers on the grand, the macro level of the market. And for guys that don't drive play, it's hard to pay, wingers in the $5 to $7 million range. It doesn't happen as much anymore. So I think he can be a competitive guy. I think the Canucks are going to have to just grin and bear it right now.
Yeah, I was going to ask, the change of agent to Judd Moldaver, is that going to affect the price of bread here at all? Is he going to have more success than the previous agent in terms of finding a new home?
I don't think so. I don't think the agent, unless they're coming in and going full on, sending out statements and burning it to the ground, which is not Judd Moldaver's style. I don't think it makes a difference if your agent is Blake Price or Peter Cooney in Boston, like he had previously, or whoever it might be. It doesn't matter. I don't think it's going to change the current contract. And by the way, players can change agents. They work for you. It's up to you to do that, and never going to knock anyone for that. But last time I checked, the Conor Garland contract for the player,
pretty good.
Peter Cooney, he did a pretty decent job.
He did a really decent job. I've seen you talk about the Columbus surplus on defense. Do you think there's a possibility of these two sides getting together? And then talk to me about Nashville, where Dante Fabro's a healthy scratch.
Yeah,
on opening night.
The Fabro one, maybe not as big a surprise. They're Fabro, I think, is one of those guys that when David Poile was outgoing, I had him on the Frankly Speaking pod, and I said, "Did you accomplish everything that you wanted here in this teardown?" And he said, 5 out of 6. And I said, "All right, well, who's the 6th guy?" He said, "Well, I can't tell you that. He's still here." Well, now you know.
Yeah.
And I he's in that same pay scale and range as the guys that the Columbus Blue Jackets are trying to move. Boqvist was the healthy scratch in Columbus. I think they're open to moving Jake Bean and Peak as well. They're anything in that 2 to 2.3, 2.5 range. If you're playing on the bottom pair, that's not necessarily ideal, and definitely not ideal for a guy that's teetering on the 6-7 range. So in that sense, I kind of feel like it's the last thing the Canucks need is to add a guy that may be slightly overpriced or overpaid. You'd have to really be a big believer in the defenseman in order to go out and do it. Maybe you could make the argument if you feel like Boqvist is young enough that you can see some change. For me, he's too small. He's undersized to really be that guy. But I think I'd be a lot more interested in Peak.
And we have to keep in mind, too, if it's going to take some time to hammer out one of these deals, they might be better off waiting for Ethan Bear, who will come in at a much cheaper cost than the prices you're talking about, Frank. And we know there's a relationship there and a mutual desire to make something happen there, but that's going to take a couple of months to obviously come to fruition. With regards to Garland's play, what do you think is a rehabilitation period for the asset? If he gets off to a good start, what do other GMs want to see? 10 good games, 20 good games?
Yeah, I think you need a good quarter of the season.
Yeah.
I think that's probably fair. And it would need to be at a pace that sort of vastly exceeds the contract in order to get someone excited, because it's not this year at 4.95 that's really the problem. It's the 2 additional years after this one that are problematic. So part of it will depend on price. Like, that's really the big thing that could change. Whereas before, the Canucks were they would have to pay someone to take on the deal. If maybe they could get to a spot where it's just take him off of our hands for free. I don't know. That just changes the perception around the league too, that, he'd probably need to be on like a 70 some point pace in order to be like, damn, this guy could really help us.
Frank, does the NHL care about all these shorthanded teams on opening night of the season? Do they care that teams were not only not at 23 men rosters per se in terms of healthy bodies, but they had to go with 17 skaters on opening night? Do they just say, hey, you made that bet?
I think that's their response is, we set the limit. No one told you to go above it.
Right.
And I get that perspective. I personally think it's a bad look for the game. I think a 4th consecutive year of frozen flat salary cap it's good for no one. It's not good for the teams. It's not good for players. Like, let's say pick a team that has really been in jail these last few years. I think of Toronto. I think of teams that did it right and properly mapped out their salary cap in 2018 and 2019 and said, we're going to reach and spend on all these guys, but we're going to get a 3, 4, 5% increase every year along the way. That's going to help these contracts work. And then all of a sudden the rug's pulled out from under you and it doesn't increase at all. How are you supposed to get by? How are you supposed to then reshape the bottom half of your roster? You got to go bargain basement bin hunting to try and make it all work. And it's just 1 year, fine. 2 years, okay. 4, the NHL and NHLPA should have negotiated something this past summer that would have gotten this moving in the right direction, because the $50 million that's due and owed from players to owners, it'll be paid off before the month of October is over. That's how insignificant the sum is. And not only is this painful for players right now and teams, but the fact that the cap didn't increase last summer and now the next 2 seasons, according to the CBA, are tied to a very specific increment of 5% increase, it means that you've also now cut back the number that it will be for these next 2 years. And so I don't think the NHL is upset, because they're like, we've got the best cost certainty going, especially as the cap is relinked to revenue.
Yeah. With you 100% on getting that player debt paid off. It should have increased the cap this past summer. Abbotsford's Devon Toews has a new deal with the Colorado Avalanche. There was some wondering whether Colorado would go this route given the age of the player. Tell us how all that came together.
I think it was hard to deny Devon Toews that kind of deal. Like, it became a point where, 7 years might maybe feel like a bit of a reach, but if you're the Colorado Avalanche and you can win 2 more Stanley Cups in that time period, you're like, yeah, whatever, we'll deal with years 6 and 7 when we need to. I love it. I think it's a real reasonable number for a guy that you can count on to put up 50 points. And I think he's so much more than that to the Avs. It's not just the production. He's really the yin to, the yang of Cale Makar. Not that there's a lack of balance there or anything like that, but those two play it's a symphony, the way that they work together. And it's just really special to have that. And when you get it and you're comfortable with it, you try and do everything you can to keep it. And I don't think anyone's looking at 7.25 for the next 7 years and being like, yeah, that's rich. It's only going to get better.
Well, and in that vein, Frank, Blake and I have been fascinated by what's going on with the Buffalo Sabres. And you mentioned you were at the baseball game last night. It was the Atlanta Braves and their Canadian general manager a couple of years ago who said, to hell with the young, cheap, controllable years for all these young stars that we have. Let's sign them long-term. We'll pay more for them now, but we'll be paying less for them several years down the road, and we'll have them under control. Buffalo seems to be taking a page from Alex Anthopoulos here in the way they're conducting their business. Tell us what your feelings are on it, and tell us whether you think they're onto a new paradigm here. They're NHL.
Actually following the Ottawa Senators. If you want to,
they're kind of doing it too. Yeah,
the Sens were the original team that just said, we're going to get every single guy we can as part of the fabric of our team to commit to us. And maybe the first year or two of those deals, you're feeling a little pinch between the shoulder blades, but it's, the middle part of these contracts and like, look at some of these guys, like look at the Jack Hughes deal in New Jersey. We were just talking about this on Daily Faceoff Live. 2 goals to start the season, 99 points last year. And he signs that 8x8 deal. And you go, at the time, I was like, why did you have to commit to that? He had a 50-point season and a 30-some point season. It was kind of like if you just look purely at numbers, a very Nathan McKinnon-like start to his career for a number 1 overall pick. And you go, man, that felt so early. Like, he could have went out and had another season like that, and he still would have paid the same thing. But then he has the 99-point season, and it's at 8. And in such short order, I think right now you're looking at it and you're going, that deal is an absolute steal.
It's a Nathan McKinnon deal. You're exactly right. It's a Nathan McKinnon deal.
But think about what it's going to look like 5 years from now or
Crazy.
3 years from now when the cap is $100 million. They're literally laughing. So the Sabres and Sens have taken the same approach. Tim Stützle is already in the same category as Jack Hughes in terms of elite play. And now the Sabres got their guys on the back end locked up with, I think the Dahlin deal, even at 11, is good. It's a different situation than Power, but he had 73 points last year, and these guys are, everyone on their team's locked up that matters through 2030. 2030. Do you know how far away that sounds?
Oh, I know. That doesn't even sound like a real year.
Are we going to have flying cars? Are websites still going to even exist?
Mm-hmm.
Will there be podcasts? We don't know the answer to any of these questions. I don't know what I'm doing next week, but the Sabres know who's going to be playing on their blue line until 2030. That's powerful.
Yeah. And I guess the only risk is if any of these guys fall off the table, right? If the level or injury strikes and suddenly you're looking at
a big risk, like Jake Sanderson, right? Like that was a big one in Ottawa, right? A big risk.
But I would tell you it's not. I would tell you that last year alone, he was, if you take the ELC aside, he was already close to an $8.5 million level in production and play and all the different areas of the team that he touched. So for me, I don't think it's crazy at all. It's exactly how I would be doing it if I were in charge.
Great stuff, Frank. Have a wonderful weekend. Take good care of our Canucks when they're through Philly next week, and enjoy the baseball.
Yeah, thanks, guys. See ya.
This Sick Harrison Price clip brought to you by Applewood Auto Group. And remember,
it's all good at Applewood.